Hello and welcome. I'm Natasha Crowe. I'm a psychotherapist and wellbeing coach, and welcome to the Stress Factor Surviving Under Pressure. I can't wait to show you some of the tools and techniques that I've been sharing with my clients and organisations for the last 17 years. So, welcome in. Firstly, I invite you to turn off your distractions, get rid of your phone, and if you can, grab yourself a pen and paper. And of course, I'm going to be answering questions towards the end of the session. So anything that you have a desire to ask or anything that comes up for you during the session, then just jot it down and we can obviously have a look at those towards the end of the session. So today, I'm going to invite you to be present, which is something that as human beings we find particularly hard, especially within the busyness of the world in which we are in. So I invite you to put your phone away, turn off your distractions, and just bring yourself back into your body. Perhaps take a breath. Bring your breath into the diaphragm and right the way down into the tummy. And if you're sitting down at your desk, then if you put your feet flat on the floor and just imagine that you're grounding yourself into the present. Remember, this session is for you to connect with yourself and get as much out of it as you can. So, we live in busy, high-demand environments. The world is noisy, it's loud, and there's lots of information coming in at us at any one time. So what we're going to cover today and what you're going to learn and what you're going to take away with is how stress and anxiety impact our focus, our sleep, and our emotional health. The role of habits in managing pressure and fatigue, and often why men and women tolerate stress differently. The importance of boundaries to help us manage stress. And at the end, I'm going to guide you through a gentle grounding meditation. And you're going to leave with lots of tools to help you through challenging times. So let's begin. So understanding that stress has often different elements to it. So our nervous system is one of the first things that we're going to look at today, how we interpret stress in our bodies. We're going to look at the effect that has on our body and brain, so our physiology, how those things are interwoven and connected. And then we're going to look at the practical tools that can help us manage stress differently. And it's not that hard when we have small pockets and little tools that can help us through that. So what is stress? Well, it's the body's natural survival response. And it's often the noisiness, the busyness, the to-dos, the mental load. It's actually a triggered response from something that is a perceived threat. So our parts of our brains that are responding to something that once upon a time would have been a saber-toothed tiger or a roaring lion is suddenly an inbox full of emails. What I'm hoping to do by the end of today's session, as I do with many of my clients when I'm talking about stress, is how we can reframe it. Stress in the modern world is not a weakness. It's also not failure. It is biology. It's an understanding of what's going on for us as individuals. Now, remember, we all experience it differently. So many of you will know what fight, flight, and freeze is. This is our natural autonomic response to danger. And of course, it's helpful in the short term if you're someone who works well under pressure. You might like a tight deadline. You might be someone who works right up to the wire. It can also help us get through challenging times if you're someone who perhaps maybe enjoys long distance running or an element of adrenaline or fear. This kind of helps us do risky things. But when that model and module is turned on for too long, it can become draining. So we're going to look at two elements to this today. We're going to look at actually what's going on with our physiology. Cortisol and adrenaline. These are our two prominent stress hormones that increase when we are under perceived threat. Now, you'll know that there's a lot of buzzword around cortisol and how we can reduce it. Cortisol is probably the thing that most of us are running on at any one time in high pressured environments. And that will come from everything, from a phone call, from an email notification, from scrolling on social media. All of those things start to increase cortisol. Adrenaline is, again, something that helps the brain and the body focus and come into this kind of directed approach to dealing with the threat. Now, if you're someone who likes to run marathons, then you'll know what that feels like to get that flood of adrenaline. And in some ways, it helps us get over the finish line. The important thing to remember about stress hormones is that we need to recover when they have been heightened or when they have been throughout the body, throughout the day. We need sleep and recovery to protect our ability to tolerate stress. And I think that's probably the most important piece, that we need to recover from this heightened level of hormone and stress throughout the body. So I want you to think about your own stress. What happens for you on a daily basis? Perhaps you notice these things. You're looking at your fight and flight response, and of course, that's coming often from the body, from the gut, from this feeling or sensation that we get. But also what's important is to understand what's happening in the brain. So if you look at our little diagram here, you'll see that the brain fires off these stress responses. And it does that to keep us going, to keep us alive. But in some majority of situations, the perceived threat is minimal compared to life and death. So cortisol and adrenaline pump out to help you cope with the challenges. So that short-term benefit, of course, helps you prepare to face those immediate challenges. Long-term, though, when we're under constant pressure, chronic stress, this can disrupt those hormones and therefore affect other parts of our well-being. And for any of you who have perhaps experienced chronic stress or burnout, you will know what that feels like, that recovery becomes challenging and harder. Even motivation becomes more difficult, finding joy in the things that we once, enjoyed. So what's happening in the body? I want you to have a think now about what it feels like when you are stressed. You might get heart rate increase. So, your heart feels like it's beating out of your chest. Breathing shortens. Muscles tense. So anyone who feels that tension in their shoulders and the back of their neck, your body is responding to that stress. And I often say to clients, they've come in with their shoulders right up to their ears, and it's the sense that they can slowly begin to drop them when they recognize that they're holding on to that tension. Our focus narrows, which sometimes can be really helpful, but in other ways it's also difficult because we become so fixated on one piece of work or one part of the thing that we're worried about that we begin to remunerate. So we end up with challenging, difficult thoughts. When stress becomes constant, we begin to see things like chronic fatigue, low energy, lack of motivation, sleep disruption. And I would say when I work with clients, this is probably one of the first things that they present with. A disruption in sleep, because sleep is, of course, when we begin to recover. Headaches, tension, and very often digestive issues. So all element of, IBS, or where you're feeling a little bit disrupted in the digestive tract, upset tummy, all of those sorts of things are connected to the stress hormones. So that gut-brain axis, again, this piece in our physiology that's constantly working in unison. We aren't designed to cope with the amount of information that comes in at us at any one time. And I'm sure all of us know what that feels like. Constant stimulation, notifications, the way in which we communicate as individuals, so many lines of communication that we can be contacted at any one time. Little recovery, high demand. So pressures that come from us feeling that we are constantly on. And that in some ways can really distract from being present. Constant need to please others. It's one of the biggest pieces when it comes to stress, not being able to say no. So the problem isn't necessarily the external stress, it's the lack and the ability to be able to separate. And of course, the lack of recovery. We live in a world where rest is seen as a sense of failure or it's demonized. That wasn't how our ancestors worked at all. So, what I want you to think about is how often you go into this fight and flight stage. Think about the demands on you every day. So, looking into some of the data that's there, that 5,000 plus extra messages, that's not just the things we have to deal with. So we're under constant stimulation, and we've got to then process that. We've got to take it in, we've got to acknowledge it, we've got to see whether it's important, whether we need to respond to it. So 79% of anyone within a workplace will experience regular work-related stress. Huge numbers that we know in lots of industries has a real impact on performance, but also retention. 74% of UK adults report feeling overwhelmed by stress. Now, stress doesn't just come from work, of course not. It comes from all of the demands we have as human beings. And again, we still come back to this piece around little time for recovery. Sometimes in life, it's that we are packed full, our diaries are overwhelmed, and often that remuneration, that sorting, that ability to allow ourselves a chance to rest is difficult. And often when we go on holiday, clients will often say to me, it takes me 3 or 4 days to actually decompress, to switch off. Because again, we're in this heightened state of high pressure responses all of the time. So your nervous system, that's the first kind of connector to the stress around us. It's where we are bringing in that information when we're seeing if the world is safe. We feel it first, and then we calculate it and work it out through our messaging, through our brain. We're not designed for constant input. And I think in a world where we live very much in a digital age, our brains are just not designed to work in that way. We need to be mindful of that. So I'd like you all to grab your pen and paper, and I'd like you just to have a little think about what's going on for you in this moment. How does your body let you know that you are under stress or pressure? Perhaps you suffer from an injury or something that flares up when you're under stress. Perhaps you get headaches or migraines, or you become very tense within the body. Have a think about your own personal experience, perhaps in the past, perhaps at the moment, or it might be something that you've had to learn to manage and get better at dealing with. And then I want you to think about your life right now. Where does stress show up for you? So as I said before, it's not always work. It can be relationships. It could be health. It could be caring for others. It could be financial. It could be just the mental load of managing life, work, family, and all the other things that we have to deal with in a very busy world. So think about one particular area where stress shows up for you right now. And then I want you to think about how you manage that stress. And working with habits is one of my favorite things, because we believe that sometimes these things are so entrenched, but actually we can break them, and we can do that pretty easily if we know how to do it. So what stress habits have crept in during stressful periods that have helped you get through the day? Now, that can be anything from sugar, chocolate, alcohol, scrolling. It could be shopping. It could be any of those things. I want you to think about perhaps one that you may have managed to change, but one that perhaps pops up for you when you are in a stressful period in life or during the day. And then dig a bit deeper into that. So if your stress-related habits were trying to protect you or meet a need, what do you think that might be? What are they trying to do? If stress and fight and flight is trying to protect us from threat, what do habits protect us from, or what might they be trying to do to serve us? And I'm going to follow on from that in a few slides' time. So take a few moments there to really think about your own personal experience. The body, how does stress show up in your life right now? What habits have crept in during stressful periods? And if stress-related habits were trying to protect you or meet a need, what do you think that need might be? So when we feel overwhelmed and we feel that our tolerance to stress can become too much, and remember, we all have a different tolerance, a different way of dealing with stress. The anxiety that is felt within the body, remember, anxiety is a sensation, it's a feeling, and then it gets interpreted by the brain. So anxiety is not our identity, it's a sensation and it's part of us being human. It's, again, our elevated and activated alarm system. So the parts of the brain called the amygdala, which is like a kind of fire alarm telling us, beware, watch out, there's a threat ahead. And you think about the parts of the brain that are our sensible kind of decision-making brain, that is actually this frontal precortex. And on our little diagram here, you've got these two parts of the brain where it's all serene and mindful, and the other side, which is quite dark and difficult. Now, when anxiety and stress can coexist at the same time, for many of us, of course, it's very hard to then be able to see outside of that. And it makes decision making harder. It makes us feel that we're of low mood. What's the point? How do I manage this? And anxiety isn't about overthinking. It's actually an over-activated nervous system, which is why we talk so much about the whole mind-body connection and the holistic approach to well-being. So I often say to clients that anxiety is the warning sign from the external stress. And actually, that's the brain's way of letting us know, of trying to keep us safe. And of course, then anxiety for many individuals feeds into lots of different things, such as, catastrophizing, overthinking, worrying, trying to kind of predict the future in lots of ways. And that then means that we are then out of the present and we're not living a connected life. And therefore our body and our minds are constantly in fight and flight. So if you've got your pen and paper there, I'd like you to draw these 3 circles. So this is your circle of control. It's a brilliant exercise. You can do this if you've got kids as well. It's great for kids, teenagers, and actually it's a really good thing to revisit throughout the year. I do this quite a lot when I'm, doing planning with clients, or when we're looking at things that no longer serve us. And that's what's really important. If nothing changes, nothing changes. And it's really important sometimes to take that personal accountability of what we can and can't control. So in that first circle, a very small centerpiece is the things that we have most control over. That second outer ring is our some control. So this is what we call the circle of influence. So we haven't got complete control, but we can influence, decisions around that. We can influence perhaps what goes on. We have, a limited amount of control. And then in that outer circle, draw that outer one. This is the circle where we have absolutely no control. So let's break that down. So in that outer circle, let's think about the things that we have no control over. So for example, that would be the weather. We have no control over the weather, even though in the UK we'd love to be able to control elements of it, I'm sure. News, what goes on in the outer world, geopolitics, all of the things that we feel that we are bombarded with through news feeds and 24-hour news. We have no control over that, even though we feel that we're sometimes bombarded with that information. And actually, in some ways, that is often where the anxiety is coming from lots of individuals, is this external piece that makes us feel very unsettled, unstable. No control over other people. Now, that's a hard one, especially if you've got children. It's an element of having no control over other people that you might work with or people that are in your circle. An element of understanding that everybody has personal choice and autonomy. And they may not always see things your way, but it's about, again, understanding that you may have some influence. So write down some of those things that you have no control over in your life right now. And again, you can come back to this. And then there's some control. What can you control? So if you are a parent or you are in a relationship or you're in a partnership with someone, you might have influence and control, some control and influence perhaps over the decisions that you make as a family or as a unit. You may have influence over decisions at work. You won't have total control because you'll have to collaborate with others. You'll have to work with other people and their perspectives on a situation or life. You might have some control over how you manage your day. But again, it might be that some of those things are out of your control. So, for example, you get stuck in traffic. Those things are out of your control. But if you got stuck in traffic because you left home late, then there was an element that you had control over. So it's really nuanced in how we actually manage these things. Then, this middle circle. So this is all of us who sit in that as individuals, as adults. The most control that we have is pretty limited. So have a think about what that might be for us as individuals. So the control we have is over ourselves. And that will be everything from how we speak, what we say to others, our behaviours, how we act, how we spend our money, how we live our lives, the choices we make when it comes to our well-being, all the decisions that we make. But the limited element to what's in our control is really very small. We can only work with what we can do as human beings. So that's our actions, our feelings, the control that we have over what we do with those things when it comes to behaviours. Now, the beauty of the circle of control is when we begin to break it down, once we understand what's in our control, then actually we can start to make changes. We can actually start to think, well, actually, the things that are outer in that no control, the things I'm really worrying about and the things that I'm so stressed about, I realise I have no control over. Now, it takes time. Of course it does. It's an element of being able to remind yourself what is in my small circle of control. And I'm going to teach you how to ground yourself in that in a short while, because it's important to recognise that if we're present and we stay within that circle, we feel a bit more protected. But then we also allow the brain to feel safe. The body feels safe. The nervous system then feels safe, so that we can make more measured decisions around those things. So whether we exercise, whether we don't exercise, whether we eat well, whether we choose to do dry January or not, whether we allow ourselves the opportunity to go to bed earlier, to wake up at the same time every day if we have that luxury. So think about those well-being and those wellness behaviours that we do have control over. So again, looking at this from the theory behind what's going on. So the control, how we choose things, how we pace ourselves, the habits, the self-talk, how we speak to others. And that influence conversations, the boundaries, the routines, how you respond. So again, limited control, but some influence. And that final piece, that no control, is an element of the concerns that we have that are outside of our control. So look at the list that's on there. Other people's behaviors, decisions, the past. Humans are amazing at pulling ourselves back into things that happened in the past. The economy, and as we said, the weather, if only. So, applying the circle of control daily. So let's think about some real life experiences. If we were to think about these huge, big, grand gestures that we often make at the beginning of the year, I always say to clients, I'm a bit of a non-resolutions person. We can make changes at any point in the year. They don't necessarily have to be in January. And actually, it's harder to do those things in January when it's dark, when it's cold, when actually there's an element that the body should be slowing down and still what we call wintering. So the real life examples of this is, could you perhaps focus on your next step when you're feeling overwhelmed by big goals? So perhaps you've been given a piece of work to do, or you're involved in a huge project and it feels somewhat overwhelming. Great way of doing this is chunking down into bite-sized pieces. For those of you who love time management tools, I'm sure that you use them effectively. Can you prioritize tasks rather than stress about everything on the to-do list? Now, again, this comes back to, the mental load. How many tabs can I have opened in my head? How many tabs can I keep open in my head? You can't remember it all. It's absolutely impossible. Humans are not designed that way. So can I deprioritize some things? Can I take some things off my list and put them on the the not urgent, not important list? And can I prioritize perhaps 1 or 2, 3 things on my list that have a priority, that need to be done? And remember, control today's actions, because you can't predict the future. So what you do today in your circle of control will begin to have a real ability to create new habits. So perhaps that might be looking at those habits and understanding that, wow, okay, can I add something in that's better for me? Perhaps a 20-minute walk, or a 5-minute kind of off social media between my break and a conversation with a colleague. Start to think about these little tweaks. So stress habits and behaviors, favorite topic of mine, as I said. This is about, we believe, I think, in society sometimes that pushing or working harder means it's a kind of badge of honor and an element of success. But overworking and pushing through and not noticing when we're burning out, perhaps, or when we are stressed, is a response. It's a behavior. It's built into actually pushing harder, pushing further. And then we end up ignoring the warning signs. So we end up avoiding, or we withdraw. We might increase certain behaviors to get us through. Sugar, caffeine, alcohol, chocolate, all of those things. We might go to numbing, scrolling, zoning out, biting of nails, fingers. All of those things are stress habits which help us as human beings soothe ourselves. So if you think about, babies or animals, about how they regulate themselves, they need us to regulate. In the example of a baby, when you're swaddling, or when you're cuddling, or when you're soothing. These are not coping strategies. These are ways of coping. They're not flaws, sorry. So look at that. We get a trigger, our behavior, we get relief from it, and then we often go back and repeat it. How many of us have done that? Not going to eat chocolate today, not going to have that third cup of coffee. So let's look at those habits. Write down any of your own, and we can, if anything comes out for you, we can talk about that at the end. Overeating or emotional eating, self-soothing behaviors, salt, fat, sugar, all of those things that, again, make the body feel nice. They self-soothe, they satiate. The receptors in the brain say, oh, that was lovely. Drinking alcohol will almost disassociate, will distract us from the stress and what's going on. Procrastination and avoiding tasks. How many of us do that? That's a stress response too, for many individuals. And obviously we know with neurodivergence, that's even more challenging because the brain is often going to avoid those difficult tasks. And that's when stress can build differently for different types of brains. And then the irony is we then overwork, throw ourselves into work to distract from the stress. So it becomes this cycle. So understanding this loop. So I want you to think about a cue. Perhaps you feel stressed at work, you've had difficult or challenging meeting, or there's a piece of work that's overrun, or there's difficult colleagues or conflict within a system or within a team. You then think, oh, I'm going to move away from that. I'm just going to distract from that. I'm going to browse online. I'm going to purchase something. I'm going to have a drink. I'm going to have some chocolate. All of those things then bring temporary relief. They also create a sort of sense of excitement. We get these lovely endorphins, we get a hit of dopamine, and we get an immediate response. But we can break it. It takes time, and this is not stuff that can be done overnight. But if you keep doing it in small increments, you can change things. So first of all, I want you to identify the cue. Recognize what triggers that habit. Could be a place, could be a person. It might be an emotion that you're feeling, something that's coming up for you. It could be fear or worry. Changing the routine. So swapping an unhealthy action for a healthier one. So perhaps if you're someone who goes and buys coffee or chocolate, it might be that you think about swapping that out for another habit or another healthier routine. It might be, okay, I'm not going to go and buy coffee today. I'm actually going to go for a walk around the block and see what that feels like. Now, your brain is going to keep telling you it needs coffee, it needs caffeine, it needs you to go and reward it. Take action anyway, because it's the doing that changes the state. So actually go with it, keep moving, keep changing the state. Coming back into yourself. For those of you who perhaps practice meditation or mindfulness, notice and reframe that reward. Congratulate yourself for actually making those changes. Focus on the long-term benefits of breaking these unwanted habits. So the secondary gains that come from that, we all know that there's a gain. We all know that these unconscious, habitual habits, they reward us. My example there is overworking and never setting boundaries, never saying no, never turning your laptop off. It feels good, validated or important. But if you're never praised or validated or never fed back that it's that the thing that you're doing is really good, then actually that's a detriment to your own well-being. You are then feeling dejected, what's the point? And you're feeling exhausted and burnt out because you've spent 15 hours a day working on something. We have a problem with saying no as human beings, and I think that that's something in boundaries that we need to get better at as well. So avoiding saying no and always saying yes to avoid the feelings of guilt, avoid the feelings of conflict, of upsetting someone. How many of us are people pleasers? And saying no is really hard, and it's not something as children we're taught to do. And I think that that's social conditioning too. We find it hard. But we can get better at that when we think about what's in our control. So gaining approval and avoiding discomfort is often the gain from that. And it's like, oh, I can't say no to that. Yeah, I'll pick that up. Yes, I'll do that. We all do it. And it's something that when we talk about checking in on ourselves, it's about, okay, something needs to change. There are very different elements to how men and women manage and deal with stress. Women are cyclical beings. We are hormone-led. We are very much moving with our cycle throughout our lives, regardless of which area or which age or stage you are in. Now, you'll have these slides to share, by the way, as well. So if you want to come back and look at them, please do. So, the psychological impacts: increased worry or remuneration, not feeling good enough, higher rates of burnout and emotional exhaustion. Women will often be carers, there'll be nurturers, there'll be people who are looking after others. And that's not just family, that might be in a team, it might be in a community. Again, finding it hard to say no and taking on more. And then there's disruptions in sleep. Higher levels of emotional exhaustion is certainly something I see with many women that I work with. And again, increased sensitivity to stresses. So these things rise as our tolerance changes. And again, difficulty switching off. How many of us go to bed at night, lying awake with a to-do list in our head, only to wake up at 3 a.m. with another to-do list in our head? Our brain is trying always to sort and find solution for us, even when it's probably not very helpful. So looking at those physical and hormonal impacts, remember, estrogen and progesterone are the hormones that help us find balance. They regulate our mood and energy. So again, that fluctuation throughout our lives. And again, oxytocin. Oxytocin is something that connects us to others. If we feel oxytocin, we feel safe. So we're not usually feeling any stress with that, this lovely feeling of connection. Long-term health impacts. And of course, we are understanding the element of stress over long periods of time more than ever. So inflammation, high risks of autoimmune conditions, and a reduced stress tolerance over time. Now in men, it's more inward. So we'll look at avoiding, suppressing. We'll know that men will shut down, but it will come out in different forms. So it might be irritability or anger. I'm not saying that women don't feel these things, but we'll often see a withdrawal, and we'll see a suppression of emotional difficulties. So an avoidance to actually what might be going on internally. Again, similar physical impact. So again, sleep disruption, poor recovery, fatigue. And then, of course, that leads into the behavioural, which might mean, poor diet, poor nutritional intake, increase in alcohol, again, pushing through stress rather than pausing. So delaying those things. And again, long-term impact, higher rates of cardiovascular strain, and obviously increased blood pressure. So our stress map, again, this is something that you can come back to. It's noticing your own individual stress map. So what are the things that trigger me? What are the things that my body's telling me first? And what's going on in my head? What are the thoughts that are coming up when it comes to stress? How do I know I'm reaching a period of early stress? How do I know I'm in burnout? And these are the things I want you to really dig deep into. Your emotions around certain things. How do I manage stress when I'm feeling certain things? And again, habits and regulation, which we're going to do some of that work in a minute. So looking at these things, you can draw this out if you want to. And again, it's noticing, where do I feel most stressed? What are the things that perhaps I'm doing that I've been doing for a long time, which are no longer serving me? Because noticing these things early on means that we can protect our well-being long term. So this awareness is about prevention. So the stop technique. You all know what a stop sign looks like. For anyone out there, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is almost like a psychological break. So we imagine that we're almost saying the stop in our heads. And I say to clients, what I want you to do is visualize a stop sign. Because what that means is it helps us pause. It disconnects what's going on between the body and the mind and the nervous system, and it brings us back into regulation. And it allows the anxiety and the stress and the overwhelm to kind of dissipate slightly before we can actually move and proceed. So it helps sort of break that cycle. So we take a brief pause. T, you take a breath down into the belly, into the tummy. Bring yourself fully into that present moment. So acknowledge, observe those thoughts. What's going on for me? Where am I? What's happening? Who am I with? Environment. Do it without judgment. Humans are so hard on themselves. It's okay to have feelings and overwhelm. You are human. A human being, not a human doing, I often say. So observe it. It's really important to slow down and observe. And then when you've noticed what's going on for you, that kind of reset begins to shift things, and then proceed with a more mindful approach. So with intention, we go through life often on autopilot, especially when we're dealing with stress habits. We are not intentional about what we're doing. And so we're often, working from the subconscious, which is always at play. But we can choose to respond more consciously by slowing down. So the stop technique is one that I have been working with for a long, long time, and it's a really powerful technique. So use it. Highly recommend it. So you can use it wherever you need to. So notice perhaps any changes when you start using this. Just slow everything down. We talk about that all the time in such a busy world. So it might be before presentation or a meeting or, difficult conversation. How can I just bring myself back into the present, into the body, so that my mind is not, 300 steps ahead of me and I'm not catastrophizing? So the most important piece when it comes to putting a lot of these techniques into play is boundaries. Now, boundaries, I could do a whole workshop on this, and this is about helping you prevent the outcomes of running yourself into the ground and becoming so stressed that you burn yourself out. Boundaries matter because in a psychological sense, they protect us. They aren't to keep other people out. They are to protect your time, your energy, and your well-being, so that you have some internal space to actually quantify what's happening in life, to be able to find a sense of balance. Now, balance isn't equitable. It's not a perfect science, but it's about building in healthier habits. And without those boundaries in place, we don't have a safety net. We don't have that kind of safety barrier around us. So old patterns begin to take over. So it becomes that we then go on to autopilot, and then we go, oh, well, what's the point? I can't break the cycle. So then we go around in that cycle again, that reward loop. So think about perhaps if you have managed to put boundaries in place. Perhaps you've done really well at doing that in the past. Perhaps you've had to learn to do that. So again, time boundaries, turning off notifications, making sure that you have the 8 to 8 policy or the 7 to 7 policy, because obviously we know that those things interrupt our sleep. So helping those boundaries reinforce those new habits. So can I put boundaries in place that protect my routine, my walks, my gym visits, my meditation, my water intake? I mean, it's as simple as hydrating. And saying no creates a sense of space. Really good examples of saying no are, I'm really interested in that, but I'm at capacity right now. It's a much softer approach than, saying no. So again, some other ideas there around the boundaries are bridges between where you are and where you want to be. They protect your energy, they nurture the growth, and they teach others how to respect the changes that you are making. So again, finding support with the people around you. And as I've said throughout today, is the small, consistent, tiny changes that you make, tiny steps. No one ever trained for a marathon in the first day of training. We're looking at tiny, small, low resistant. Now, low resistant is important because even on busy or stressful days, that consistency matters. And compounding that, small actions that add up over time. So you're building on habit. You're filling up that bucket with tiny drops of water. And don't be so hard on yourself. There is no such thing as failing when you're trying to change and make habits and deal with and manage stress. Self-compassion goes a long way, and how we talk to ourselves becomes so important. So you could track your progress. People love habit trackers. Some people don't want to track anything. That's absolutely fine. This is your individual journey. So pair with the reward. Find a piece of relaxation. Find something that you enjoy doing. A client of mine yesterday said, she used to love reading, and it was something that's just, she's hasn't had time to do it. So bringing things like that back into your life, hobbies, all of the things that regulate us, sunshine, getting outside, gardening, connecting with others, social interaction, community, volunteering, and be patient. Compassion goes a long way when it comes to how we feel about ourselves. So micro habits build into longer lasting routines and patterns. So again, I'm sure that you'll have come across many of these in the past, and certainly throughout this week. Breathing, journaling, movement, and boundaries. So perhaps set yourself a little task this week. Say no to one unnecessary commitment each week. It does get easier over time. So we know that regulation comes first. We need to regulate our nervous system. We need to calm the body and restore it to safety. When we feel safe, we are far more capable of making really good, solid decisions about things. When we feel safe, we feel connected to others, and we can problem solve. So our gentle, simple micro tools: breathing, grounding, movement, and boundaries. So I hope that you have taken some of those techniques and you'll be able to apply those as we go through. I want you to commit to one small, consistent action to kind of reduce the daily stress in everyday life. Control what you can control and release what you can't. And creating that balance, again, not a perfect science, but as I've said, here are some of the top things that we can do. And you can come back to these slides at another time. Simplifying things, making life easier for ourselves can be hard, but it's rewarding and it's necessary. And keeping ourselves in that present part of being grounded as a human being. We are humans and we are not perfect. So let's just take a moment to finish the session before we have our Q&A. I just welcome you back into your body and all the things that we've talked about, perhaps those things that have come up for you. And just if you choose, just gently close your eyes, relax your shoulders, bring yourself into the body. And I invite you just to place your hands on your chest, on your heart, and take a breath in. Just notice where that breath is. Notice any tension within the body. And again, imagining that you are creating that wave of relaxation all the way down the body from the very top of the head and scalp. Notice how that sensation moves into the belly, releasing any tension across the shoulders or the back. And with a sense of compassion and loving kindness, imagine just saying the words, I'm calm, I'm peaceful, I am enough. Imagine that gentle flow of energy that moves throughout the body. Again, creating a safe place around you, so a bubble of protection, a gentle reminder to slow down, connect with yourself. So I invite you back into the room. I hope that sensation of allowing that stress to flow away from you as I go through some of the questions that have come up. So I'm going to just read a couple of these out. I feel a constant need to be productive with my time. I don't allow myself proper restful activities. Instead, I doom scroll in pockets of time and breaks. How can I reframe my thinking to permit myself that rest time and view it as a necessary activity? Brilliant question. Because we are not taught to value rest in Western society. And this is one of the biggest pieces I see in mental health. And I've been doing this a long time. We have to begin to value rest as an important part of recovery. So that's really important. And I hope that what you have gained today will help you build out on some of those activities. Rest is should be a non-negotiable for all of us. It's not laziness. I find it difficult to switch off at night sometimes to allow me to recover. It's overthinking. What can I support to do this? So there are two elements to this. First, you need to really go through that decompression between having those boundaries, as I've spoken about. So making sure that you have time boundaries so that you finish work is finished. You pop your laptop away. You even remove yourself from the room perhaps in which you've been working in. If you're a commuter and you're someone, don't do any work on the commute home. Have something, have some tool, have some interaction, whether that's reading, listening to a podcast, where you're actually creating these routines. Sleep hygiene is really important. And it doesn't just start when we get upstairs and brush our teeth. It starts a couple of hours before that. When I'm stressed, my mind closes down completely and I find it difficult to complete the most simple and basic tasks. How can I manage stress better? Well, I hope that we've answered some of that today for you. When your brain is in fight and flight, it will go into survival mode and it will again, almost switch off that frontal precortex, that decision-making piece. The stop technique is great for that, being able to pull yourself back into the present and really notice, what do I need here in this moment? Our breath is what we call the brake. So breathing, even though we go, oh yeah, I've been told to breathe again, it's actually about understanding that's really important. It's the free tool that we are given that we use the least. So I know that some of you will have access to breathwork, mindfulness. I encourage you just to do some basics to look at that. How do we differentiate between stress versus depression? They are very different things. Depression is the internal physiological and emotional state. The stress is the external, so what we're feeling. And depression is a piece that needs, obviously, clinical practitioners to help you with, and that would be that you would be seeking out support from your GP as a first point of call, or any of the organisations that can support that. But yes, depression is often a result of a stressful life. I find that when I take time off work, as I leave, I tend to find myself feeling and getting ill at this time. Why is this? Your immune system is compromised when we're in fight and flight, when we are really, really stressed, and when we are in that constant cortisol. Your immune system is protecting everything. Your brain is protecting everything. And of course, once you relax and slow down, many people got sick over Christmas, didn't they? You relax and you slow down. Your immune system goes, okay, they're out of fight and flight now. We're going to make sure that we're susceptible to everything. So that's why looking after your gut health, making sure that you eat well, but making sure that you notice when you're in those periods of high stress. It's so important. You need to look after yourself throughout that period, even when we're in stressful times, I don't really notice getting stressed until it's overwhelming and I start to shut down. Are there easy ways I can spot stress within myself? Well, I hope that if you go back to the stress map, you'll begin to notice those internal triggers. I would say one of the first things that happens is the physiology. What am I feeling? Are my shoulders up here? Have I got backache? Is my pelvis sore? Have I got low motivation or low mood? Am I dropping out of the things that bring me joy? My fitness watch says, aside from daily stresses, I'm stressed throughout the night in my sleep and tells me even though I've had a good amount of sleep, it's not enough to recover from stress. How can I control my stress levels while I am asleep? Help. Great question. You can't control them when you're asleep. You can only control them during the day when you're awake. And I go back to that piece around rest and recovery. Sleep is for restoring. The rest and digest period, it's where the body renews itself. Stress needs to really be managed before we get into bed at night. And it's about those tiny micro changes that we make. Are there keywords to look out for if someone is under pressure but masking it? Good question. Yes, I would say listen for language around overwhelm, a negative frame in the language that they're using. I'm feeling it's too much pressure. If it's becoming, personalized, if it's a person-centered piece where they feel that it's too much, but they again can't put the boundary up by saying, I can't do this, it's too much, I need to say no. Is there a way to train your brain so you can use a circle of control more effectively? I've used on occasions, but often my anxiety takes over. Yes, there is. Going back to the final parts of the micro habits, just get really good at doing it in really small increments. Think about one thing that you control. Someone close to me recently experienced rapid heart rate at rest, high blood pressure, clamminess, tightness between the shoulder blades. They ended up in A&E after many hours was discharged, and they said it was just stress. What would be their best course of action? I mean, this is not something that I hear very often, and it's terrifying to think that we can create that physiological response when it's stress. We have to look after ourselves. We have to be more mindful of the care and attention that we pay to ourselves as we would to others. We have to be accountable for our own well-being in lots of ways. I love this one. Not a question, but I find your voice very soothing. Do you have a podcast? No, I don't, but there is one coming in the pipeline. I wanted to say thank you so much for having me. I've loved every minute, and I hope that you've got lots of tools and ideas. And please, do go back and watch the slides. They're free for you to choose and to take screenshots off and apply the tools. And I look forward to perhaps joining you again sometime soon. All the best, and thanks for having me, and enjoy the rest of the week. Take care.